A press conference, dozens of cameras, and Jimmy Butler silenced the entire NBA without uttering a single word. He just smiled, but that smile shattered the media games that had been built up over the years, the masks of loyalty and the fake friendships. So, what happened that made Skip Bayless stab Stephen Curry in the back on live TV? And why did everyone find their own truth in Jimmy Butler's silence? Of course, subscribe and turn on notifications before you learn the whole story and what happened, because we're just getting started. And write your favorite basketball player in the comments so they can be featured in our next story. Let's go. It was just another day during the NBA's mid-season media days. Camera flashes were popping, and stars from every team were rushing to interviews one after another. Some were there for their sponsors, some to increase their follower count, and some just to be seen. For Jimmy Butler, it was just another ordinary day. The atmosphere in the press room was tense as usual. While Stephen Curry was answering questions about his upcoming documentary, media personality Skip Bayless, sitting next to him, listened to Curry with such admiration that he almost applauded after every sentence. He had been his advocate for so long that people had started calling him Skip, Curry's shadow. But something was different that day. As soon as Curry finished speaking, a reporter fired off a question. "Skip Bayless made some claims on your behalf last week. He talked about internal team plans and even playoff rotations. Do you have any comment on that?" Curry's face suddenly changed. His eyes narrowed slightly and he smiled, but it was not a warm smile. On the contrary, it was cold as ice. "Skip? What statement are you talking about? I haven't spoken to him in a long time. Whatever he said is his opinion. He doesn't represent me." Silence. At that moment, everyone in the room knew something was up. Curry didn't continue. The sentence was short, clear, and deadly effective. Skip's face was tense. The camera angle shifted toward him, but he was almost transparent. Perhaps that was the moment his career was broken. But before he realized it, the break had already begun. Jimmy Butler, who was quietly waiting in a corner at the back of the press room, smiled slightly when he heard those words. It was a short, quiet, but sincere smile. It wasn't meant to be mocking or a reaction. It was as if he was saying, "The same game again?" But the microphone was on, and that smile was already on the broadcast. A short time later, it exploded on social media. At first, only a few people noticed, but then the video was cropped, re-uploaded, and comments started rolling in. Headlines such as "Jimmy laughed," "Butler's reaction caused a stir," and "The quietest diss of the year" quickly went viral. By the time Jimmy noticed, it was too late. His phone wouldn't stop ringing as he returned to the team. His manager Marcus couldn't hold back his laughter during a video call. "Dude, you just laughed. You didn't say anything, but everything is falling apart right now." Jimmy shrugged. "It was just the truth, that's all." The media began to analyze this little smile. Some thought he was mocking him. Others said he might have been tired. An NBA psychologist even said the following on live television: "This is an internal explosion against years of staged loyalty. This player is tired." But Jimmy had no intention of making a statement. That was never his style. That evening, discussions about Curry and Skip raged for hours on NBA Network. Did Curry really lose his focus? Was Skip leaking information? Could Butler's smile be a sign of a new era? Jimmy was at his home in Miami with the TV on mute, just watching the reflection on the screen. His manager Marcus was with him. "Do you think it was planned?" Marcus asked, referring to Curry's attitude. Jimmy shook his head. "No, it definitely wasn't planned, but it was 100% real, and that's why it was so effective." At the same time, the social media feed on his phone was still full of Jimmy's smile. Everyone was talking, but Jimmy was silent, because that smile was actually a stance, and the NBA was definitely not ready for that stance. Marcus shook his head. "That's the part that stuck the most. No acting, no stage, just a genuine reaction." That smile said a lot. Jimmy didn't respond. He just sipped his coffee and stared at the screen. He chose to keep the silence going, but the outside world wasn't staying quiet. That smile was no longer just a social media trend. It had become a symbol. The next morning, all the NBA commentary shows were discussing one thing: Curry's dismissal of Skip Bayless, and Jimmy Butler's silent but powerful response. Some commentators praised Jimmy's attitude as a symbol of disciplined leadership, while others argued that he was unnecessarily blowing the incident out of proportion. However, there was one common idea. That smile signaled that something was changing in the system. Meanwhile, Skip Bayless was back on screen. His usual confident and aggressive demeanor had given way to a sense of tension. There were signs of fatigue around his eyes, and an uncertain tremor in his voice. He had defended Curry for years, even getting into arguments on his behalf. But now, Curry's public implication that he didn't recognize him had shaken him deeply. During a live broadcast, when the host asked, "Are you still in contact with Stephen Curry?" he looked away and replied, "I've always been on his side. Everyone knows that. Everything I've done for the good of the NBA." His answer hung in the air. The host quickly changed the subject. That alone was enough. Later that day, social media was abuzz once again. Videos of Skip's past, praise for Curry, juxtaposed with his latest comments, flooded the internet. Some saw him as a betrayed loyalist, while others criticized him, saying, "He was just part of the show. What did he expect?" Jimmy didn't respond directly to any of this. After practice in Miami, he locked eyes with his manager Marcus in the locker room. "Skip's just trying to save himself," Jimmy nodded. "They've always been playing for the cameras. No one knows who they really are when the cameras are off." That same evening, Curry made another press statement. This time he seemed more controlled. He talked about the team's chemistry and plans for the season, but one sentence stood out. "Sometimes it's clear that not everyone is on the same page. That's the nature of this business. But my teammates are the ones who are with me on the court every night." Commentators interpreted these words as a jab at Skip Bayless. It was now clear that there was no support. The old friendship was broken, replaced by a kind of distance. The NBA community's attention was shifting elsewhere. Especially among young players and media followers, Jimmy's attitude began to be seen as a leadership lesson. Tweets saying, "He just smiled and the crowd went wild," were shared thousands of times. His followers sensed strength, balance, and honesty in his silence. One night, Marcus showed some screenshots from his laptop at Jimmy's house. "Jimmy, look at this. A fan wrote this." Jimmy, without saying a word, he said what we were all thinking. Sometimes the truth speaks louder than words. Jimmy just sighed and said, "People are tired, Marcus. Everyone talks so much, but almost no one listens. That's why it makes so much noise." Marcus nodded. Maybe it's the first time someone has been so genuine. At that moment, Marcus received a notification on his phone. It was a message from an NBA media producer offering Jimmy an interview, but Jimmy immediately turned down the offer. "I'm not going on a press tour." I just laughed. Inside, things were starting to unravel. Skip Bayless, who once had a powerful media alliance around him, was now alone. Some commentators appeared to be on his side, but most were not so sure. On social media, some called him a victim of the media, while others wrote that he was finally paying the price for years of arrogance. But the real change was coming from within. The talk in NBA circles was different now. Some members of the media had started messaging each other. Was Skip next in line? Why did Curry dismiss him so harshly? Are there other secrets? Jimmy's silence only fueled the questions. Because the less he said, the more people wrote their own scenarios. A few days later, Jimmy spoke at a charity event at a school in Miami. The topic was not basketball. This time, it was education. But at the end of the event, one student couldn't help but ask, "Mr. Jimmy, why did you laugh that day?" After a brief pause, Jimmy replied, "Because sometimes, when a lie lasts long enough, all you can do is laugh when the truth comes out." The room fell silent. Then there was a light round of applause. It was not just out of respect, but because they finally understood. Everyone there that day realized that this story was about much more than Skip Bayless's downfall or Curry's silence. It was also a story about how the truth slowly but surely came out. But not everyone was ready to accept the truth. That week, Skip Bayless seemed to be on a media damage control tour. ESPN, Fox Sports, independent YouTube channels, whatever platform had a microphone, he was there. Throughout the interviews, his tone was tense, his facial expressions inconsistent, but he didn't seem as confident as he used to be. "I'm still standing with Stephen Curry," he said, "but this business can be complicated sometimes. Some things may have been misunderstood." But that phrase, misunderstood, didn't reassure anyone, because Curry had been very clear. "I haven't seen him in a long time. He doesn't represent me." He left no room for denial. Skip was visibly wearing down with every broadcast, and the cracks in his voice were growing. During one broadcast, he dropped his microphone while trying to put his hands in his pockets. On another show, he avoided eye contact with one of his former broadcast partners during an argument, and couldn't get his words out. The charismatic figure on the screen was now just a fragile man, but the real collapse was happening inside him. Everyone was talking about it in the NBA media's internal chat groups, WhatsApp channels, and press rooms. Skip's old connections had stopped responding to messages. Some broadcasters were canceling their programs with the excuse of taking a few weeks off. Slowly, the circle around him seemed to be narrowing. Jimmy Butler, however, remained silent. He made no statement and did not post anything related to the issue on social media. When a reporter asked, "Mr. Jimmy, is it strategic to remain silent in the midst of all this?" he simply replied, "No, I just don't think there's anything to talk about." Even this answer made headlines, because even if Jimmy didn't speak, the world was speaking for him. That week, a short documentary titled "Leadership in Silence" was released on the NBA's YouTube channel and attracted a lot of attention. It showed the most critical moments of Jimmy's career, followed by a recounting of the recent events. At the end of the documentary, there was only one scene: Jimmy Butler's silent smile that day. The music stopped, and only the slight hum of the hall accompanied that moment. The video was viewed millions of times. In the days that followed, young players began to reach out to Jimmy directly. The messages were always very clear. "I've been silent for years. I saw myself in that smile. I don't want to wear masks anymore." Looking at these reactions, his manager Marcus said one day, "Do you realize what you've done? A simple smile brought out everything that had been suppressed for so many years." Jimmy put down the files he was holding and turned to him, because people just want to see the truth, not the outside of the game, but the inside. Meanwhile, Skip Bayless had begun to play his last cards. He tried to leak information from secret sources, implying old messages. He created an "I know everything" atmosphere. He even said the following in a broadcast: "There are some secrets in this industry. If I reveal them, everyone will definitely be very surprised." But this threatening attitude didn't work either. The public no longer trusted what he said. Whatever he said was perceived as a defense and seen as weakness. Because people had already realized the truth, silence was clearer than shouting. On Curry's side, there was a surprising silence. He didn't make any further comments on the matter and closed the topic completely. However, from the gestures of his teammates, their facial expressions on the court, and some small interview quotes, one thing was clear. The incident was definitely being discussed within the team. A young player couldn't hold back at the post-game press conference. What Jimmy did was huge. He said something very clear without saying anything. "It's thanks to players like him that this league is still standing." This sentence was everywhere the next day. Jimmy, meanwhile, was visiting a charity in Miami that day. There were no cameras, just children, a training court, and a few volunteers. They played basketball and chatted. At one point, a little boy asked, "Sir, I saw you on TV. Everyone seemed scared because you smiled at someone. Who was that man?" Jimmy bent down to the child's eye level. He smiled slightly, but this time it was different. It was warm. "Sometimes people try to make themselves look big, but if they're empty inside, even a smile is enough to take off that mask, kid." The child nodded, not quite understanding, but Jimmy's voice had certainly reassured him. That was the point. Even if not everyone understood, that smile had set something big in motion. Later that night, Marcus and Jimmy were sitting together, looking at photos from the day's visit. Marcus took a deep breath. "Skip, he's going to say they sold me out on a new show tomorrow." Jimmy shook his head. He always thought so, but the truth is, No one can be unforgettable in this league. If you live in the shadow of a man, when that light disappears, so do you. Marcus bowed his head. So your smile wasn't just a reaction. Jimmy closed his eyes for a moment. It wasn't. It was just the beginning. Marcus was silent for a few seconds after hearing these words. Then he whispered, "So what happens now?" Jimmy shook his head slightly. "I'm not going to decide what happens. The game has already started. Now everyone has to choose their side." That was indeed the case. The next day, the NBA media was rocked by a new earthquake. Skip Bayless appeared on the long-awaited live broadcast. The program was titled, "They Sold Me Out." He appeared with puffy eyes, a pale face, and looking exhausted. But beneath that exhaustion, there was still an unbroken stubbornness. Looking directly at the cameras, he began, "Everyone who knows me knows this well. I have always loved this league. But some people can applaud you one day and stab you in the back the next. Yes, I defended Curry, and yet I spoke on his behalf. But now I see that some people somehow view this loyalty as a weakness." The host didn't interrupt. Skip continued. "Jimmy Butler just laughed. He didn't even say anything, but he implied something to everyone. Is that it? Will years of hard work be erased with a smile?" At that moment, the program's viewership skyrocketed. But this time, instead of support, criticism poured in. Most viewers interpreted Skip's comments not as a defense, but as a sign of helplessness. Social media was flooded with comments like, "He's still talking, but no one is listening anymore." One of the NBA's former stars said it bluntly on a podcast, "In this league, loyalty has become a PR strategy. Everyone is trying to look like they're loyal to someone. But Jimmy's strength is that he's not loyal to anyone. He's only loyal to himself." The waves continued to grow within the league. At team press conferences, players began to take sides indirectly. Some supported Curry, while others cited Jimmy's stance as an example. A young player said to microphones after the game, "I've been in this business for a long time, but this is the first time someone has had such an impact without saying a word. All Jimmy did was smile. That's it. And everyone's masks fell off at once." Meanwhile, there was still no direct statement from Curry. However, he appeared more tense on the court. In some games, he lacked his usual cheerfulness. He chose his words carefully at press conferences and changed the subject before questions were asked. An invisible distance had formed between him and his teammates. A reporter asked Curry a direct question at a press conference. "What do you think about Skip Bayless's recent comments? Your loyalty is being questioned." Curry didn't look up, just adjusted the microphone. He responded with a short answer. "I only speak on the court. The rest is people's interpretation." Compared to Jimmy's silence, this response was considered overly strategic and calculated, and this began to damage his image in the public eye. As the days went by, Jimmy Butler was working out alone at his training facility one day. There was no one else in the gym. Except for the echo of the ball hitting the floor, everything was silent. Marcus was watching him from the gym door. Jimmy was drenched in sweat, but there was no sign of fatigue on his face. On the contrary, he seemed more relaxed. He felt as if he had been freed from a heavy burden. When the training session was over, Marcus approached him. Smiling slightly, he said, "The media has started calling you the silent hero." Jimmy wiped his face with a towel. Then he put the ball aside and started walking. "I'm no hero, Marcus. I'm just tired of watching the same play over and over again. Actually, everyone has a role to play. One is the bad guy, one is the victim, and one is the hero. But that's not how things work in real life." Marcus shook his head. "But what you did was different. That smile. People felt a connection with you in that moment." Jimmy stopped. "Because I'm just like them. They also see what's behind the masks. But no one can speak up. I couldn't speak up, but my smile was enough." A few days later, Jimmy was participating in a charity event when reporters surrounded him again. The incident was still fresh, and comments were still flying. One of the reporters called out from the crowd, "Mr. Jimmy, everyone is talking. Do you think this could be a turning point for the NBA?" Jimmy turned to the crowd. He took the microphone in his hand. For the first time, he was going to speak directly about the issue. Everyone fell silent. Silence is sometimes clearer than shouting. Everyone knows the truth, but no one says it. because speaking up comes at a price. I just kept quiet, and everyone started talking, so I guess we were all waiting for this. The crowd began to applaud at the end of his sentence. But this applause was not out of excitement, but out of awareness. It was as if everyone had heard their own silence there. Later that night, a new trend started on social media, at Gerçek Gülüş, real smile. People began to share silent but powerful moments from their own lives. A teacher described how she smiled in response to an injustice she heard in her classroom. A nurse wrote that she could not stand up to a manager at the hospital, so she just shook her head. What they all had in common was this: a smile, a stance, a silence, and the source of inspiration for all of them, Jimmy Butler. But Jimmy was not someone who would take credit for this inspiration. He had remained silent not to draw attention to himself, but to maintain his inner peace. The moment he remained silent while everyone else was talking broke something inside people, perhaps bringing to light truths that had been silently suppressed for years. This silence was not just a media debate. It was like the end of an era. That week, Skip Bayless appeared on screen for the last time. The familiar look of anger was gone from his eyes. He looked like a broken man. He looked at the camera, and his voice was much quieter than in previous episodes. I've worked for this league for years, arguing with players, defending them, always standing up for them. But now I realize that sometimes the biggest mistake is not recognizing those closest to you. He paused. He swallowed and continued. Whatever happened between Stephen Curry and me happened. But at the end of the day, this is what I learned. Once loyalty is questioned, it can never be the same again. And Jimmy Butler, you didn't say anything, but you showed everything. The program ended with that sentence. When the broadcast ended, social media was silent for a short time. Then the comments started pouring in. People didn't even feel sorry for Skip. Some saw him as a belated confessor, others as the voice of regret. But one thing was clear. There was no turning back. Trust had been broken. In Miami, it was a sunny Sunday morning. Jimmy Butler had gone to visit his mother, Marcia. He walked through the streets of his old neighborhood, where he had spent his childhood, and when he knocked on the door, his mother embraced him. As they entered, the smell of food wafting from the kitchen reminded Jimmy of the sounds of his past. Marcia was talking while standing at the stove. "You're on TV again. Everyone is talking about you. This time it seems like people are stopping to think because of you." Jimmy sat down on a chair and took a deep breath. "I didn't do anything, Mom. I just smiled." Marcia turned around and looked at her son. There was pride in her eyes, but also a wise softness. Sometimes, doing nothing says the most. People are tired of fake faces, shouting and fighting. Your smile became the voice of millions who were silent. Jimmy looked away. He smiled shyly. "I didn't mean to." "That's why it worked," said Marcia. "What's real isn't planned. It just happens." At that moment, the clock was ticking in the kitchen. Jimmy turned his eyes to the window. Outside, children were playing basketball. The sound of the ball hitting the ground. Shoes hitting the concrete. Laughter from afar. It all seemed to remind him of something, where he came from. That evening, a 3-minute video was posted on Jimmy Butler's official social media accounts. There was no dramatic music, no big words. Just Jimmy, sitting on a chair, looking at the camera and talking. "I'm in this league because I love basketball. But now I know that it's not just about putting the ball in the basket. It's also about what you don't say." And he continued, "Sometimes people don't speak, but you hear them. I didn't speak because I was tired. The same game, the same words, and always the same faces. But that day, the truth came out, and everyone heard it." He approached the camera. "The truth remains even in silence. Only that remains." When the video ended, the screen went black. There was no logo, not even a slogan, just a simple ending. That night, another turning point was reached in the NBA community. Some media figures began to cite Jimmy's stance as an example. There was talk of a new generation of leadership. It was no longer the loudest who won, but the silent. Some teams began holding seminars for young players, teaching them not how to speak to the media, but when not to speak. A newspaper column was published with the headline, "The Way of the Smile, Jimmy Butler and the New NBA." Weeks passed. The incident slowly faded from the headlines. New games were played. New debates arose. But that smile, that silence, that stance were never forgotten. One day, at the end of season gala, Jimmy was called to the stage to receive the Impact of the Year award. He stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause and approached the microphone. Everyone was expecting a long speech, but he simply said, "The most meaningful moment for me was when I said nothing, because sometimes silence is the clearest answer." Applause erupted from the hall, but this applause was not for the show or the spectacle. It was the applause of understanding. That day, when Jimmy Butler stepped off the stage, no one talked about him, but everyone understood what he meant. If this story resonated with you, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. For more stories from the world of basketball, check out the videos on the screen.